Hi, my friends. Welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, your host, and also an indie author. I'm thrilled you're joining me today for another fun interview with a passionate author. We're going to kick off this show with an exciting reading, so let's get started.
All right. Thanks for having me on here, Ms. DC. I appreciate it. My name is Ruben Degollado. I'm an author of a couple of books. First book that's been published is my YA novel, Throw, which I'm going to be reading from today. I have a second book that was recently announced. It's a collection of short stories called The Family Izquierdo, and it's going to be published by Norton in, I think, 2022, possibly the summer. And that's a expansion of the world that I set up in my first book. Has a lot of the same characters set in the same time, but it is for an adult literary audience. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share just a little bit from my first book. It's about a boy named Cirilo. His friends call him Güero, which means he has kind of a fairer complexion. And his girlfriend Karina, who goes by the name of Llorona, which she takes that name from the Mexican folklore ghost of La Llorona. She certainly lives up to her name. She's a really tough girl. Very mysterious. You see a lot of mystery behind her, and there's a very real reason why she's taken the name of this folklore ghost. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share a section of the book where kids are doing what kids do, and they used to do more so in the 90s, I would guess, is go to the mall. So this section is introducing my main characters. My narrator, again, his name is Cirilo. He's 15 years old. He's in the summer between his sophomore and junior years. He is going to see his ex-girlfriend, Llorona. So they've been broken up for a while. And so there's that awkwardness of guy and a girl seeing each other and pretending that they don't exist. And even though he tries to ignore her, tries to not think about her, she's in his mind lurking at every corner. So he definitely hasn't gotten over her. So let me start. The question that kept going off in my mind like a firecracker was this: where's Llorona? And as if she knew what I was asking, the dressing room door opened and out she walked. Llorona wore a white shirt that showed her tight brown stomach with an HCP tattoo, Hispanics causing panic, her belly button ring, and these white pants. She had the blue makeup tears on the inner corners of her black eyes, the only tears she cried now. Llorona's hair was pulled back, but with two dagger-thin horns of hair, cuernitos pointing to her demonia smile. Her small lips shaded a brown so dark it was almost black. Her naked throat was so long and pretty, her collarbones so thin and delicate like a bird's. I remembered holding on to Llorona's neck when I used to walk her to all her classes, which always made me tardy. At first, she didn't like me to do this because she said it looked like I owned her. What I had said was that I was proud of her, how beautiful she was, but that I could never own her. Llorona would never belong to anyone. How do you own a ghost? But Ray, her current boyfriend, was the one who was proud of her today. And the way he was looking at me, it all started to make sense. For a second, Llorona gave me this look like she was going to smile and hug and kiss me, as if these months of us being apart had never really happened. This was the way it was with us. Because we'd been together since 7th grade, off and on for almost 4 years. Whenever we saw each other, it always took a second to remember we weren't together anymore. We were habits to each other. As soon as we did remember we weren't together anymore, the ghost game began, where we pretended to see right through each other. I never told my friends Angel or Smiley, but I always hoped one of us would stop playing the ghost game, that those seconds of forgetting our not going around would go on, and turn into minutes and hours and longer, that our apparitions would take shape, becoming flesh and blood and bone, our hands reaching out to one another to make sure we were real. Llorona smiled, and I felt something in my chest. Down the back of my neck I had not felt in a long time. But Llorona wasn't looking at me, and she sure wasn't smiling for me. She was smiling for Ray. Que gacha. That was what his looks were all about. Ray was looking at her with his player smile, the one that says, I own you. Ray had no idea who Llorona was, the kinds of things she could do to people. Did he think we called her Llorona for nothing? Would she be named for the ghost woman who drowned her babies in the Rio Grande River if she was just some pichona you could control, some trained little pigeon who would always come back to you? Llorona was no harmless little pigeon. She was the lechuza, the owl you see just before someone is about to die, the one that haunts you in your dreams and you never want to see in real life because it means you're about to lose someone you love. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. And it is our last day of our birthday celebration, and this week has been amazing. So, we're getting ready to wrap up this week with another amazing author. And Mr. Ruben, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me on. Really excited about this.
I am so happy that you're on this show. You have been on my list of people to get a hold of forever. As you can tell, I have failed miserably because it's taken me a year to get a hold of you, but it's okay.
No worries.
You are here today. So tell us, let's jump in. What is this book about? Give us some details. Bring us in.
When people ask me about the book, I like to read the cover blurb on the dust jacket here. So let me just read that for you. Llorona is the only girl Güero has ever loved. A wounded soul, she has adopted the name of a ghost from Mexican folklore. True to her namesake, Llorona cast Güero away with the coldness of the apparition she has become. But Güero, though he would never admit it to his friends, still wants to get back together with her. Güero spends time with his friends Angel and Smiley, members of the HCP, Hispanics Causing Panic gang, roaming the streets of the South Texas border towns they inhabit, trying to forget Llorona even as she seems to appear around every corner. Over 3 days, Güero's increasingly violent confrontations with Llorona's current boyfriend will jeopardize the lives of Angel and Smiley and the love he hopes to regain. As events begin to accelerate toward their conclusion and gang signs are thrown as both threats and claims of identity, the question arises, will Güero throw the HCP sign or will he throw off that life? Güero's life will be irrevocably changed by violence and loss, but who will he lose, and will he, somewhere along the way, lose himself?
Ooh, this is a lot more in depth than just a triangle love story. You're looking at a lot. This book takes place in the 90s. Why? Why that decade?
I think the reason I picked the 90s, well, first of all, I wrote it a long time. So I wrote it between 2000 2005. I wrote the first draft. But in our history, in Texas history, and I guess across the country, gang activity was at its height in the 90s. And so part of that was inspired by a movie that was very popular at the time called Colors. But you had a lot of other movies during that time, like Mi Vida Loca, American Me was big, and then Blood In, Blood Out was another popular movie. So it was very much in the consciousness of just our culture, our society at the time. And so a big book for me growing up, in middle school and into high school even, I read it as well, was The Outsiders. And as a teacher, I taught that book every year, and the students loved it. They were, very much into the story, this story about these troubled boys, sort of a semi romance kind of a thing going on between Cherry Valance and Pony Boy. But what I noticed was my Latino students, though they liked the story, they didn't necessarily relate to the characters on a cultural level. And so I started thinking, well, could I do something similar for that kind of has the same feel as far as the what's at stake and having these kinds of confrontations with, like they did between the Greasers and the Socias. Could I do something like that? And so I contextualized it, put it in a valley setting in the 90s. And then this young girl popped in, Karina, and she kind of she became bigger. She became larger. Than the more I wrote about her, the more mysterious she became, and I definitely started to focus a little bit more on her story. I think the reason I picked the 90s again is I don't think the story could have happened at any other time, but it's really specific to that time in our history, and particularly in this area in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas along the border.
I like the connections you're bringing to that specific period of time and what a lot of boys and a lot of girls are going through at that time. You're talking about gangs, you're talking about violence, you're also talking about heartbreak and how you brought it all together. Your writing, it's absolutely beautiful. Let's just put it out there. I was like, oh my God, this poor boy. I just want to hug him.
was going to say, and I definitely, when I was a teenager, I accessed those very powerful feelings because when you're 15, you don't see ahead to when you're 30 to when you're 40 and you're going to be married to somebody. In his mind, this is it. This is the person I'm going to love and I will always love her. There's nothing really any different for me. I can't see past these feelings that I have right now. And so I wanted to capture that. I felt that way as a teenager. I remember, I wrote in a journal. I would journal these very serious, awful poems, which I hope if I ever get famous and I ever get archived somewhere, definitely going to burn those before that happens because I don't want anybody to see that. That's where I came from with his emotions, just trying to access how I used to feel as a teen.
You did an amazing job because I usually joke a lot when it comes to teenagers, and it doesn't matter the decade. But I always take it for granted that everything is so much passionate,
Hmm.
everything's so much intense, and your books just brought it all to life. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. It's just here. It is this moment when you decided to do this book and you went YA, because you could have done an adult book, let's be
Hmm.
honest. Why YA? Why were you trying to connect with that audience? And you mentioned it a little bit more, but I want you to go deeper.
When I first submitted it to my publisher, he didn't necessarily see it as YA. He saw it as literary. We had kind of a meeting in Seattle and we just sat down and we were talking about the book and he says, "Is this a YA book?" And when I initially wrote it, I think I had that concept that it was a YA book. Like I said, I mentioned The Outsiders. The more I wrote it and the further drafts I went into it, I started at the same time I was also submitting literary short stories to journals. And so I've always had that kind of a dual audience. Like I have a literary audience, but then I was always thinking about a YA audience. But then I started reading books. And so what I did was I started reading books by Latino authors, by Chicano authors, and I discovered that there was no book that had, there's a lot of at-risk kids in books, don't get me wrong, in YA books. And then there's kids that they struggle with a lot of issues, the same issues that my characters struggled with, but no one had ever, that I had seen, had ever delved into this period of time in the YA audience, and certainly not to the level of authenticity that I think I put into the book. As I was thinking about when I would hand a book to my at risk kids, my kids that were gang affected, that were coming from broken homes and dealing with a lot of these issues, nothing that I put in front of them that was as authentic as I think they deserved, as they wanted. And so that was one of the things that to me I was thinking about. I wrote it for all teens, of course, but in particular kids that were reluctant to read, perhaps that were dealing with issues. Maybe some of the adjudicated youth. I know that the book I'm friends with a counselor and with a youth advocate that works with adjudicated students, and he does a reading group out in Houston. So the kids love the book. And so that's really why I think I went the YA route. I mean, it can be read as a literary book as well, but definitely the YA audience picked it up. It was pretty successful. It won the Texas Institute of Letters YA book in 2020 and got a lot of other accolades. So I think people resonated with it. And then even if you're not, an at-risk youth, you did have an ex that was your first love and you can't seem to get over them and you remember them very well. And then you have friends that, when you were in high school, possibly you said, what, I love these people, but I think for my own future, I need to get away from them. And so that's kind of what Wedo's having to decide through the course of the book.
This is a very deep level of, life changing situations. And it happens at that specific strategic time. So I love the fact that you tap into it. And I love the fact that the book has such a wide spread and the kids are connecting and resonating with it because that
Right.
says a lot about your writing. Did you expect that feedback from them?
I had hoped that they would. My concern with the audience was that I'm writing a book about the 90s and here we are in 2020. My fear was that it's before the internet came in, it's before technology, social media. It has none of that, right? So the kids don't even have cell phones, not even the old cell phone that we had that made calls and that was it, back in the day. So
Those
I that
things.
was that was my fear. This modern audience is not going to necessarily get it. Some of the students, that are reading it, or some of the audience not getting it because it was so old, set in such a time. But my hope was that these feelings that these characters feel, the way they interact with one another, the way that your friends become a found family, I think that's universal and I think that's timeless.
Those are definitely timeless pieces and they translate everywhere. And the writing absolutely is going to connect. And the ones who's going to get it will get it. So now tell us this book It's amazing. Now it's translated into a collection of short story. How did that happen?
I mentioned earlier, I've always been submitting literary short stories to journals, and I've had quite a few published. But my focus has always been on this one family. And the family, their name is the Izquierdo family, which in Spanish, it means like on the left-hand side or left. And so all of my short stories were about this family. Actually, in one short story that I wrote that got published by Image Journal, Cirilo, he appeared in it. And so my main character from the novel appeared in it. As I was writing him and just a couple of scenes with him, there was a sadness to him that I didn't really know. When you write characters, and somehow, sometimes a character has more depth than what you see on the page right there. There's something else going on there. And so I started writing a short story about this young man from his voice. As I was writing it, it became more. I said, okay, I think I have a novel here. So then all those other things about the outsiders and about everything else came into play. But everything I've written been published up to this point, and I think maybe there's a couple of outliers out there somewhere, but everything has been written about this one family. And so I have this fictional family, the Izquierdos. There's 10 uncles and aunts. There's a multitude of cousins. When you're in a big family, because I come from a big family, I have 13 uncles and aunts on one side, and then I have 7 uncles and aunts on another, and I have over 50 cousins. There's a lot of stories there, so the way it happened was I'd written these short stories over the year, and they were coalescing into something larger, because in this story that I have in the second book, The Family Izquierdo, I have this thread of a brujo who has cursed the family because he's jealous of them. And the reason he's done that is because of their success. They're a moderately successful family, in the 90s in the Rio Grande Valley. They own a business. Family members are, they're pretty well off. I mean, I'm not saying they're rich or anything, but by the standards in the neighborhood where they come from, the barrio they come from, they are. So there's that thread, this thread of a curse going through the family, but then everything else in it focuses on different characters. And when you're from a big family, everybody has their own distinct voice. They have their own story. So I wanted to capture that. So the stories are told from, one story is told from Maggie, who's a hairdresser, and she does miracles with her clients. Another story is the 3 mystic sisters. One of them, there's a something miraculous that happens at her quinceañera. Another one ends up having a vision of the Virgin Mary. And so it's all these things combined. It started off with this one character, and then on the page, as far as in the novel, I introduced the family. I always knew that there was something larger to tell with this extended family, these Izquierdos.
I would like to tell you that I feel like you're describing my life right now, because I'm like you, come from a huge family. I have one side has, 7 uncles and aunts, and I had 10 on the other side. I was like, oh my God, I completely understand. I love the fact that you're bringing the culture into the picture, that you're bringing all of our superstitions and our religions and our upbringing into something that is so normal with us that sometimes we take it for granted. So I love that. Hey, brujos all the time, because my aunt is convinced that she can talk to the dead. I'm like, please stop. I don't need to know any of this. Come on now.
Yeah.
Nobody needs any of that.
Yeah. But we have those stories. And I think what's so funny is that when we sit down and write a story, we don't always think that, what, I could probably, if I were to focus just on my family and I was just to think about all the different voices and all the different stories, the folk tales and the mysterious things that we've heard about, that I could spend my entire writing career on this whole family. And I think that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. I'm sure I'll offshoot at some point, but I have enough material with this extended family that it's all interconnected. That's a beautiful thing. That's what I love, is that they're interconnected. Like, you can pick up my first book and you could say, oh my gosh, that's the aunt at the end of that scene. And then you read another story. She's in a story where Selena heals the aunt through her music from the grave, or that they think that's what's happening. And so that's, to me, that's the beauty, is that there's so many great stories to tell in our culture if we just dig and we just think about it a little bit.
You're so right. If we think about it from that perspective, and I'm going to spin this right now since I have you here. Brand new author coming into the world, and they're trying to figure out how to start. You talked about the family. What would you advise them? Like, how would you advise them to say, this is what you should do to get you started?
I've been asked that question before, and I think one of the most important things is to pay attention to the world around you. And that sounds so basic, but I think it's something that we don't often do. So if we pay attention to the way people talk, if we listen to people, if we take the time to have a conversation with someone and listen more than we actually speak, we're going to find that there's a mine of things that we can draw from later on. And so I have a little book where I'll just write down an observation or someone's phrasing and then paying attention to that. So when you sit down to write something, you have not just a story idea, but you have characters, right? And so every character, I don't want to say that my work is autobiographical, but someone says over here and the way this person looks and their outlook on life over here. So you always combine. So there's elements around you. And so even though I said it's not autobiographical, the work that I do, I mean, every author will tell you that some element is from their life somewhere, someone they knew. I mean, that's just the nature of being a fiction writer. There's that part. And then the second part, I would urge any of your listeners or anyone wanting to start out as a writer is to submit, if you're a fiction writer, submit short stories to literary journals. I always recommend starting out with short stories because I think what a lot of YA writers do is that they go full blown into writing a novel. And so if you've never written a short story, you've never studied the craft from the beginning to the end, a story arc and following a character and their development in just 10 pages of a short story, and then you jump into a novel, I think that's why a lot of writers end up quitting because it's so overwhelming. So, because once you actually get into writing a novel, it can make you or it can break you. Some people do it well and they have never written a published short story before and they just, boom, they're on the scene. They're a novelist right away. But I think for a lot of us, that can be very overwhelming. And so that's what I would recommend is just focusing on your craft, writing short stories, and then submitting those to journals. Keep doing it, get better. If you make your mistake in a literary journal, that's great. But once you get to a novel, you're at the point where you can't make those mistakes anymore because people are counting on you to write a good story, to be, to have the continuity there, to have the voice down, to make sure that you handle all of those details that lead up to your conclusion, lead up to your climax or whatever. So that's definitely what I recommend is to start short stories, build your way up to writing that book, which is what I did. It worked for me.
That is such an amazing advice. I haven't heard it in the podcast yet. And most people don't think about writing short stories, they kind of take it for granted. What made you decide to say, yeah, we're going to do some short stories? How much fun do you have writing short stories? Let's be honest about this.
If I could, well, I'll say this first. Short stories, they don't sell as well as novels. It's a collection that I have, and I know it's not going to do as well as the novels. I mean, we're getting better at it. I think a lot of our authors are opening the doors for that, but I love them because I think it was Edgar Allan Poe that said a short story is something you can sit in one reading. Like you sit down and for the next 25, 30 minutes or whatever, you're done with the short story. I like them because it's a compact world in those 2,000 to 10,000 words. You see a moment of someone's life. And I think that's the beautiful part of it is that when you write a short story, you're not thinking about this person as a child all the way to an adult or for a length of years. You're really just thinking about these moments in someone's life where there's a transition. And so I always see moments of enlightenment, moments of catharsis as being like perfect stories that are contained. They're more powerful to me. And so the way I view a short story is it's in between a poem and it's in between a novel, right? So in that middle with a short story, it's like a poem in that you have to pick every single word you're going to write about. You have to think about every single line, every image you put in there. It has to be impactful. You can make more mistakes in a novel as far as, okay, if I put that detail in there, maybe I don't have to pick up on that later on. Maybe I don't have to deal with it. It's just there. But in a short story, if there's a person there, there's an object or anything, it really does have to have meaning. When you write a poem, it's the same way. Every single word has a meaning. When you write a short story, every image, every word that is spoken, conversations, etc., also have to have meaning. And in a novel too, but I think it's more compact there. That's why I love the short story. That's where I started. I'll always write them. Even as I continue writing novels, that's something that I'm always going to focus on.
I officially have been bitten by the short story bug because that's all I want to write lately. I don't know why, but it is that sense of being very compact, very to the point. It's just the essence that comes. I think it's the speed that comes with a short story that sometimes we don't get with a novel. So I'm totally with you. So tell me, your journey to publish, how was that road for you?
Well, it's a long road for me. And I want to encourage anybody, if you're writing and it's been a year, it's been 2 years, you have a project, you've put it out there and no one's published it, be encouraged. I wrote this book, like I said, I wrote it in the early 2000s. And I want to say it was like 18 years ago when I wrote the first draft. And I sent it out. I sent it out to some mainstream publishers, like Big Five. I didn't even know about an agent. I should have gone back and researched all that. I didn't know about all that at the time. So I sent it out, I want to say 5 times, did revisions. I sent it out again. So I think I sent it out maybe like 10 times. And then life happened. I got married, I had kids, or I was already married, but I had kids. And so I kind of put it away. I didn't really focus on it for a lot of years. And then here it was in 2015. I had also sent it to some Latino publishers, small houses, and it didn't get picked up. And I had almost given up. And I said, in 2015, I said, you know what, let me try again. Let me go through this again, and I'll submit it to somebody I know that I worked with and had published me in literary journals. And so I sent it out in 2015. Like I said, I didn't hear anything for a couple years. And then I got an email and said, is this still under consideration? I said, yeah, sure. Like I had pretty much given up on it at some point. And I don't recommend that. Don't ever do that. I regret that, definitely. But, life happens and you kind of like, okay, this isn't for me. Got that email. And then, within a day, it was like, I like this. Let's talk about this. I'm like, wow, okay. So my editor, Greg Wolf, said, let's talk about it. And then he read it some more and he says, okay, let's make this official. Let's do this. Are you up for this? I'm like, yeah. Hello. Sure. It's only been 18 years since I've written it. Let's go for it. Right. Like writing, the way it's going to work is you're going to be waiting for a long time. But once it happens, it's like boom, 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 boom. It's fast. So you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And then things start to happen. So it happened pretty quickly. And I believed in this press a lot because there were, publishing books. They're at that intersection of literary and faith-based. Went with that, and then pretty much that was the story there. And then once it was out there, it was like, okay, are people really going to like this? But I was very pleasantly surprised. I was a one-man marketing team. If you're an indie writer or a small press writer, you're basically on your own. There's no budget to speak of. There's social media and there's friends and stuff. But it was very well received. I think it hit above its weight level. In other words, it took off. For a lot of people, it was a book that they had never pretty much heard of, but there was a lot of or just organic marketing going on with people. And it did pretty well for what it was. And so I just encourage you that my big message in all of that is just to tell you that don't give up, keep it up, because what else are you going to do? Right. So in that span of time, I could have been researching agents and other things. I just kind of gave up on myself as a writer. And you're going to do that from time to time. But here I am. I got it published, been successful, and it encouraged me to submit my other book, which is going to be much bigger publisher, W.W. Norton out of New York. And so I never even thought that would happen. And it encouraged me to look for an agent. Let me look for an agent, right? So I never thought of that being worthy of like having work good enough to be considered by an agent. But I ended up getting one and ended up getting this second book on contract. So it's exciting.
That is so exciting. And I love the fact that you went back. Yes, don't give up is huge, but the fact that you went back and your passion is still there. Because
Yeah.
sometimes we give up and the passion goes away. So you could have been at that point in time like, no, I'm done with that. I'm sorry, you're too late. But the fact that they call is like, hey, are you in it? You're like, yes, I'm in it. I love that. So that is powerful. So I am so excited to have you, by the way, and I can talk to you forever. So we're going to switch gears right before we close. But before we do, tell us, where can our listeners find you? Where they can learn more about you? Where they can find the books? Tell us.
So I'm pretty active on Twitter, not so much on Instagram. I'm at Ruben_Degollado. I also have a fresh coat of paint on my website, so please check that out. Ruben, RubenDegollado.com. So that's kind of where you could find me. And definitely, as far as social media goes, and I know we've referenced this before, you and I, but I try to maintain a pretty positive presence online. I try to help out other writers as much as I can. That to me, that's very important, is just supporting other writers that are coming up. If they got a project going, they're excited about a short story they got published, I like to celebrate with them. Because I think, part of it for me is like, if I'd had that in my life, in that interim between the writing of the first draft to actual publication, maybe things would have been different. but I'm not looking back anymore. I'm just saying that that's a consideration. Is I like to push forward the work of other folks and celebrate their wins.
I love it. I definitely follow you on Instagram. So it's really fun to watch the videos. And you have the most eclectic life. I love it. I was like, I thought mine was eclectic, but you officially beat me. And the videos you post are too cute. I was like, so even though you're not active on Instagram, your stuff is still fabulous.
Thank
And
you.
I love the fact that you want to support. I think we're such a small community where people, believe it or not, that comes across very well. So are you ready for a lightning round?
Go for it. I've never done one before. I don't think I have. I've listened to them, but we'll see how I go.
Easy peasy. Don't think too much on them. So let's start. Breakfast or dinner?
Breakfast for dinner.
Whoa, you got me that one. I was like, really? Okay, I like. Pirate or night?
Oh, I would say night.
Nice. I get more pirates usually, but okay. Comedy or action film?
Oh, action film all the way.
Nice. Ebooks or paperback?
Paperback. I love the smell of paper. I get a book and I just smell it. I sniff it. Oh, I love that paper. And the older book, the better. I'm hooked on actual books, physical books.
You are spoken to my language because I have them all over the house. I'm like, I hope you don't get to see that because I have them everywhere. So here's your last one. Let's see how you do with this one. If you had a warning label, what would it be?
Oh, you got me there.
Ooh.
A warning label. Fragile. Fragile. I was saying fragile. Must be Italian. I can't think of anything. Warning label, do not feed after midnight. I'll say that.
I like that. Not bad. So, do you have any closing remarks for us?
No, just thank you for having me on. And again, if you're a writer, if you're considering all of that, keep it up. Don't give up. Keep writing, keep getting better. Someone's going to find your work. There's always going to be an audience for something you're doing. And it may just be, 100 people love your stuff, 50 people, 25 people love your stuff. But you know what? You made an impact on 25 people, right? So just keep it up. Don't give up. And definitely hit me up on social media. I like to just check in on people, see how they're doing. If you like my book, pick it up. But that's really not what's most important to me. What's most important is just reaching out in community in the literary world.
Ruben, it's such a pleasure. It has been so much fun, and I can't wait for events to happen again so I can see you in person. Congratulations on the upcoming book. I'm excited for you. And to our listeners, happy birthday. It's been a year. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for joining this community and meeting amazing authors. Remember, pick up your gift, taking an idea to flesh it out in 4 easy steps. This is your gift this week. And I will see you again on a regular schedule next week. So make sure to give us a like, share, invite people, and have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Peace out.